The smell of smoke yanked Thomas Reed out of bed. He stumbled toward the front door, heart hammering in his chest, only to stop dead at the sight before him. His son's army uniform, the one he'd carefully framed and displayed on their porch, now lay in a pile of ashes on the concrete. The American flag that had once hung proudly beside it was crumpled in the dirt, smeared with boot prints. For a moment, Thomas just stood there, frozen. The world tilted sideways. This wasn't a bad dream. It wasn't a mistake. Someone had done this on purpose. And he already knew who. 3 days earlier, the Timberlake Meadows Homeowners Association, led by their iron-fisted president, Claire Whitman, had sent him a violation notice. Non-conforming exterior decoration, it said. Potentially divisive symbol. Thomas had laughed at the absurdity. His son, Sergeant Daniel Reed, had served 2 tours overseas. That uniform represented sacrifice, honor, blood, and pride. It was not divisive. It was everything good about this country. He ignored the letter. The second notice was angrier, threatening daily fines. Thomas had torn it in half and tossed it into the trash. He had no intention of removing the tribute to his son. Apparently, Claire Whitman and her cronies had decided to handle it themselves. Thomas took a shaky step forward, his bare feet crunching the broken glass from the shattered display case. Every muscle in his body tensed with a rage so pure it almost choked him. He dropped to one knee beside the smoldering ruins and reached out, fingers trembling, to brush away the ashes. Among the charred remnants, he found one of Daniel's medals, the Bronze Star, blackened and twisted by the flames. Thomas closed his hand around it. His knuckles went white. Tears burned the back of his eyes, but he forced them back down. Not here. Not now. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a folded piece of paper taped to the porch railing. He ripped it free and read the message, written in Claire Whitman's sharp, prissy handwriting. Next time, follow the rules. Consider this a warning. Thomas stood up slowly, his entire body trembling. They had declared war. And Thomas Reed had no intention of losing. Thomas Reed didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, the blackened Bronze Star sitting in front of him, the ashes of the uniform still clinging to his hands. The anger inside him wasn't the wild, reckless kind, it was cold now, heavy and deliberate, like a weapon being loaded in the dark. At dawn, he reviewed the footage from his security cameras. And there they were. Claire Whitman and 2 HOA board members, James Weller and Dana Price, marching up to his porch like they owned the world. The video showed them prying open the display case, ripping out the uniform, tossing it to the ground like garbage. James laughed, as Dana doused it with lighter fluid. Claire struck the match herself, watching the flames consume what Thomas had so carefully protected. No masks. No attempt to hide. They had acted as if they had the right. Thomas watched the footage 3 times, each viewing driving the anger deeper into his bones. They hadn't just vandalized property. They hadn't just broken the law. They had desecrated a symbol of service, a son's sacrifice. And they had done it smugly, without fear of consequence. By mid-morning, news of the incident began to trickle through the neighborhood. Word spread fast in Timberlake Meadows. Whispers traveled from porch to porch, from lawn to lawn. Some neighbors texted their sympathies. Others said nothing at all, afraid, no doubt, of drawing the HOA's ire. Thomas didn't blame them. He knew the kind of power Claire Whitman held. For years, she had ruled the neighborhood like a queen, fining people for absurd reasons. A Christmas wreath left up too long, a child's basketball hoop visible from the street, a patriotic banner deemed too political. And now she had escalated. Thomas printed copies of the security footage. He sent them to a few trusted neighbors, veterans mostly, men and women who understood what it meant to wear a uniform and what it meant to have that uniform spit on. By noon, the footage was online. A retired Navy chief posted it first. Then a local veterans organization picked it up. Then a national military advocacy group. It didn't take long for the video to go viral. The comments came in a flood. "This is sickening. They disrespected every single person who ever served. Timberlake Meadows HOA better lawyer up. And somewhere, deep inside Thomas Reed, the cold fury sharpened into something even stronger. Resolve. This wasn't going to end with angry comments, or a slap on the wrist. No. He was going to make sure they paid for every single flame, every single insult, and he wasn't going to fight alone. By the next morning, Timberlake Meadows wasn't just a quiet suburban neighborhood anymore. It had become ground zero for a movement. Veterans from neighboring towns began arriving, some in pickup trucks flying American flags, others on motorcycles rumbling through the sleepy streets. Some wore battered service caps, others leather jackets covered in patches from Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. They didn't come with signs or bullhorns. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. Thomas Reed stood on his porch, watching the stream of veterans grow by the hour. They shook his hand, clapped him on the shoulder, and stood with him in silence, a wall of solidarity. By noon, local news vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes spinning toward the sky. Reporters scrambled for interviews. Neighbors peeked through curtains or stood awkwardly on their lawns, unsure whether to cheer or hide. Thomas didn't say much. He didn't need to. The video spoke louder than any words ever could. Claire Whitman, meanwhile, had gone radio silent. No public statements. No apologies. Instead, a new violation notice was shoved into Thomas's mailbox, citing unauthorized gatherings and threatening fines of $500 a day for the public disturbance. The paper crumpled in Thomas's fist as he read it. It was almost laughable, almost. But the veterans around him didn't laugh. Their faces hardened. One old Marine, a grizzled man named Hank with silver hair and a jaw like granite, growled, "You don't back down to cowards like that. You stand taller." And they did. By mid-afternoon, Timberlake Meadows was flooded with military support. Families brought food, neighbors set up folding chairs, and veterans organized shifts to keep a constant presence at the Reed house. Flags sprouted from front lawns all along the street. Thomas's son, Daniel, still deployed overseas, called in during a break in operations. His voice crackled through the speakerphone, raw with emotion. "Dad," he said, "tell them thank you. Tell them I'll never forget this." Thomas's throat tightened, but he managed to croak out a response. "We've got your six, son. Always." The video's reach only widened. Military forums, veteran support groups, patriotic organizations, everyone picked it up. Big influencers started sharing it. Soon, cable news channels were running segments titled, "Marines Uniform Burned by HOA, Community Rises Up." The story struck a nerve across America. People saw their fathers, sons, daughters, and brothers in Daniel Reed's uniform. They saw the insult. They felt the betrayal. It wasn't just about Thomas Reed anymore. It wasn't even just about Timberlake Meadows. It was about every veteran who had been slighted, every sacrifice forgotten, every moment of service dismissed by those who had never understood its weight. And the country wasn't having it. Across the nation, flags were raised higher. Military uniforms were placed in windows and on porches. People posted photos of their own service memorabilia online with hashtags like #HonorTheUniform and #JusticeForDaniel. The tide had turned. And deep inside the Timberlake Meadows HOA headquarters, Claire Whitman realized, for the first time in her life, that she had picked a fight she couldn't control. A fight she had already lost. The morning sun rose over Timberlake Meadows to an entirely different world. Thomas Reed was pouring a cup of black coffee when he heard it, the low rumble of engines, steady and unrelenting. He stepped onto the porch, heart hammering, and saw them. They came in waves. Jeeps adorned with Marine Corps banners. Pickup trucks with American flags snapping in the wind. Motorcycles gleaming in the early light, their riders clad in leather vests, unit patches stitched proudly on their backs. One after another, they poured into the neighborhood, engines cutting off as they parked with military precision along the curbs. No shouting. No music. Only purpose. The veterans climbed out of their vehicles. Some wore the full dress blues of the Marines, the sharp lines of their uniforms crisp against the morning breeze. Others stood in fatigues or jeans and t-shirts, but every one of them bore something, a patch, a medal, a cap, that marked them as brothers and sisters in arms. And they assembled. Silent. Shoulder to shoulder. Forming a line that stretched down the block past Thomas's house, past Claire Whitman's manicured front lawn, past the HOA office itself. A wall of honor. Thomas stood frozen, coffee forgotten in his hand. He had expected a few supporters. Maybe a dozen. But this was an army. He stepped down onto the lawn, joining them. A few nodded at him, a silent greeting, a pledge of solidarity. Across the street, curtains twitched. Neighbors peeked out, some in awe, some in terror. News vans screeched into the neighborhood, reporters scrambling to capture the scene. The cameras panned across the stoic faces, the gleaming medals, the firm stances. It was a statement louder than any words. You burned one uniform. 10,000 stand ready. At the far end of the line, an old sergeant major barked a command. Attention! Every veteran snapped to position in perfect unison. Hands raised in flawless salutes. Thomas's heart swelled painfully in his chest. Across the street, the HOA office doors slammed shut. Claire Whitman's silver BMW was still in the parking lot, but no one emerged. She was trapped. And the world was watching. Social media exploded again. Live streams captured the wall of veterans standing unmovable. The hashtags spread like wildfire. Hashtag Wall of Honor. Hashtag Stand with Thomas. Hashtag Respect the Uniform. Even mainstream news anchors choked up as they described the scene. One veteran reporter, voice shaking, said simply, "In all my years, I've never seen anything like this." As the sun climbed higher, reinforcements kept coming. More veterans arrived by the hour. Active duty service members on leave. Gold Star families clutching framed photos of their loved ones. Firefighters, police officers, first responders, all those who understood what service and sacrifice truly meant. They joined the line without a word, side by side. No speeches. No protests. Just presence. Just pride. At noon, a lone bugler stepped forward. He raised his instrument and began to play. Taps. The mournful notes, piercing the silence, drifting across the manicured lawns and carefully trimmed hedges like a ghost. Thomas closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. This wasn't just about Daniel's uniform anymore. It was about something older, deeper, a bond stronger than any HOA rulebook could ever hope to break. When the final note faded, the veterans remained at attention. The message was clear, undeniable. You disrespected one of us. You disrespected all of us. Inside the HOA office, Claire Whitman watched from behind shuttered windows, her hands trembling. This wasn't just some neighborhood squabble anymore. It was a reckoning. And it had only just begun. Inside the locked HOA office, Claire Whitman paced like a trapped animal. The chants outside hadn't started yet. There was no noise, no protest, but somehow, the silence was worse. That line of veterans standing shoulder to shoulder, unmoving, was a louder condemnation than any words could ever be. And the media, oh, the media. She turned up the volume on her laptop. Every major news outlet was airing footage of Timberlake Meadows. Headlines screamed, "Neighborhood in uproar after Marines' uniform burned. Veterans rally in unprecedented show of solidarity. HOA president under fire after disrespecting military hero." Claire's face flushed with anger. "This is harassment," she hissed, slamming her hand onto the desk. "This is intimidation. I won't be bullied by a bunch of glorified mall cops in uniforms." Tom Hensley, the HOA's lawyer, if he could still be called that, shifted uneasily in the chair across from her. "Claire," he said cautiously, "you have to think carefully. This isn't just bad optics. It's legal exposure. They're veterans. Active duty military. Federal protections kick in. You could be facing serious charges." Claire glared at him. "I'm not backing down," she snapped. "They are trespassing. They're obstructing operations. I want them removed. Now. Tom wiped his hands on his pants nervously. We could call the police, but. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Arresting Marines? On national television? That would make things 1,000 times worse. Claire's lips curled into a snarl. Then file a restraining order. She barked. Sue them. Fine them. Whatever it takes. I built this community, and I won't let it be overrun by a mob. Tom didn't respond immediately. His silence said enough. Outside, more vehicles arrived. Not just veterans now, but reporters, politicians, even local sheriff's deputies, who, notably, shook hands with the veterans instead of dispersing them. Claire stormed to the window and peeked out. Her stomach twisted. Among the veterans, she spotted uniformed Marines standing at attention. Their presence was like a wall of iron and honor she couldn't break. Panic began to creep into her veins. She grabbed her phone and called the local police department, voice sharp and commanding. This is Claire Whitman, president of Timberlake Meadows HOA. I am demanding immediate removal of unauthorized gatherings at 124 Sunrise Lane. There was a long pause. Then the dispatcher's voice, cold and official. Ma'am, unless a crime is being committed, we cannot interfere with peaceful assembly, especially when federal protections apply. I suggest you speak to your legal counsel. Claire slammed the phone down hard enough to crack the screen. For the first time in years, she realized the depth of the hole she had dug. The neighborhood was slipping from her grasp. Her iron rule, the endless fines, the arbitrary punishments, the threats, meant nothing against a wall of Americans standing united. And worse, whispers were starting among the HOA board members. She heard them in the hallways, in hurried phone calls behind closed doors. They were turning on her. Thomas Reed stood across the street, arms folded, watching the office with a calm, steady gaze. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. His very presence, and the unbreakable line beside him, said everything. Claire Whitman's empire was crumbling. And deep down, for the first time, she understood a brutal truth. This fight was no longer about a burned uniform. It was about respect. About justice. About standing against tyranny in every form. And she was losing. Badly. Claire Whitman didn't know it yet, but the real battle had already begun. And she was hopelessly outmatched. 2 days after she tried and failed to remove the veterans, the first legal strike landed, a thick envelope hand-delivered by a grim-faced sheriff's deputy straight to the HOA office. It wasn't just one lawsuit. It was a barrage. Thomas Reed, backed by a coalition of veteran attorneys working pro bono, had filed multiple actions. Destruction of private property for the burning of Daniel's uniform. Intentional infliction of emotional distress against the Reed family. Violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, a federal protection for active duty military personnel and their families. And that was just the beginning. Within hours, other homeowners joined in, neighbors who had been fined unfairly, bullied into silence, or pressured to sell their homes. The paper trail Claire thought she had buried was being exhumed, page by damning page. Emails. Secret meetings. Questionable property sales. Discriminatory enforcement of HOA rules against veterans, minorities, and elderly residents. The Attorney General's office announced a formal investigation. State agents began knocking on doors, collecting testimonies. News crews camped outside the HOA headquarters. Reporters breathlessly detailed the growing scandal on every channel. Claire tried to rally the board members, but they were already abandoning ship. At an emergency meeting, several resigned on the spot, publicly condemning her leadership. Others lawyered up, desperate to avoid being dragged down with her. One former board member gave an anonymous interview. Claire Whitman ruled this place like a dictator. We all knew it. We were too scared to stand up, until now. The more they dug, the worse it got. Whistleblowers came forward. HOA funds had been misused for lavish retreats, personal car payments, even private landscaping for Claire's mansion. Threats and coercion were common tactics, targeting homeowners who couldn't fight back. Federal agencies joined the fray. The Department of Housing and Urban Development launched a separate inquiry. The FBI opened a preliminary investigation into potential civil rights violations and racketeering. Claire tried to hold press conferences to spin the narrative. But every time she opened her mouth, more documents leaked, more witnesses emerged. Her face, once synonymous with control and power in Timberlake Meadows, became the poster child for corruption and arrogance. Petitions to remove her from the HOA flooded in, gathering tens of thousands of signatures from across the country. Sponsors pulled out of partnerships. Businesses distanced themselves. And Timberlake Meadows itself turned. Homeowners, furious at being associated with the scandal, held a special election. The result was swift and brutal. Claire Whitman, removed as HOA president. The HOA, dissolved by overwhelming vote. The very institution Claire had wielded like a weapon crumbled to dust in her hands. On the day she was officially removed, Thomas Reed stood on his porch, arms folded, watching from a distance. He didn't cheer. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded once, a small gesture of respect for every veteran who had stood beside him, and for the justice that had finally arrived. Claire's final act of desperation was a lawsuit against Thomas Reed personally, claiming harassment and emotional distress. It was laughed out of court. The judge's decision was scathing. This court finds the plaintiff's claims meritless and indicative of a pattern of retaliatory behavior unbecoming of a community leader. In the end, Claire Whitman disappeared from public life. Some said she moved out of state. Others whispered she was drowning in legal fees and private lawsuits. No one particularly cared. What mattered was that she was gone. And Timberlake Meadows was free. But the movement she had accidentally ignited was just getting started. Because the fight for justice, true, lasting justice, was bigger than one neighborhood, one HOA, or one woman clinging to power. It was about every American's right to honor those who had given everything. And that fire, once lit, wasn't going out anytime soon. The fall of Claire Whitman and the Timberlake Meadows HOA wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. In the days that followed, images of the Wall of Honor, veterans standing silent and proud outside the Reed home, circulated the country like wildfire. News anchors called it a modern symbol of American resilience. Editorials declared it a turning point against unchecked HOA abuses. But for Thomas Reed, the real victory came not from headlines or viral videos. It came from the movement that followed. Across America, veterans, military families, and civilians demanded change. State legislators, sensing the political and moral weight of the moment, quickly drafted a bill. They called it the Military Service Protection Act, but across social media and in the halls of Congress, it was simply known as the Reed Act. The law was simple but powerful. Homeowners associations could no longer restrict displays of military uniforms, flags, or memorabilia on private property. Any HOA attempting to fine or penalize military families for honoring service would face heavy federal penalties. Protections for active duty and veteran families were expanded under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. The bipartisan support was overwhelming. Democrats and Republicans stood side by side, agreeing on one undeniable truth. Honor must never be silenced. Thomas didn't seek the spotlight. He had never wanted fame. But when invited to testify before Congress, he knew he couldn't say no. Standing before a packed chamber, wearing a simple suit with Daniel's tarnished bronze star pinned to his lapel, Thomas spoke. "This wasn't just about my son's uniform," he said, voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "It was about what that uniform represents. Sacrifice. Duty. Country. And respect, basic respect, for those who lay everything on the line." He paused, letting the silence settle over the room. "We can disagree about many things. But we should never disagree about honoring those who serve." When the vote came, the Reed Act passed by a landslide. Real quick, if you believe honoring our service members should never be up for debate, tap that like button. A standing ovation filled the chamber, not just from the politicians, but from the veterans and Gold Star families watching from the gallery. Thomas wiped his eyes discreetly as he sat down, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders, a burden he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since that awful night on his front lawn. The country had listened. Change had come. And not just through words. Across the nation, a wave of quiet rebellion rose up. Homeowners placed military uniforms in their windows. Flags flew higher and prouder. Patriotic displays bloomed across neighborhoods once ruled by petty regulations. It wasn't about politics. It was about principle. About remembering who we are, and who we owe. And in the heart of Timberlake Meadows, now free from tyranny, Thomas Reed raised a new flag on his freshly repainted porch. Beneath it, framed behind reinforced glass, stood Daniel's new uniform, donated by veterans who had stitched into its lining the names of those who had sacrificed before him. A symbol of honor. A symbol no tyrant could ever burn again. Months later, on a bright spring afternoon, Timberlake Meadows was unrecognizable. Gone were the stiff HOA patrols, the endless violation notices, the whispered fear. In their place bloomed flags, gardens, porch swings, and pride. Thomas Reed stood at the edge of the community park, where hundreds of residents had gathered. Families sat on picnic blankets, veterans wore their uniforms with heads held high, and children raced between the rows of American flags that lined the field. At the front, a simple wooden stage had been built. And on it, centered under a golden sun, stood a glass case. Inside was a replica of Daniel's army uniform, boots polished, jacket pressed, medals shining. But it was more than just cloth and ribbons now. It was a reminder. A reminder that honor couldn't be fined away. That pride couldn't be regulated. That sacrifice couldn't be erased by a petty rulebook. As Thomas stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. He didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. Instead, he turned, faced the uniform, and raised a crisp salute, sharp, precise, unwavering. Across the park, hundreds rose to their feet. Veterans snapped into attention. Civilians placed their hands over their hearts. For a long, powerful moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the rustle of flags and the breath of a free people standing united. And somewhere in that breeze, Thomas swore he could hear the voices of those who had sacrificed before, whispering their approval. When he lowered his hand, he smiled, not a smile of victory, but of peace. They had tried to destroy a symbol. Instead, they had forged something stronger. Not just in Timberlake Meadows, but across the nation. Because now, from coast to coast, there were thousands of porches with uniforms proudly displayed. Comment respect below if you would have proudly joined Thomas Reed that day. Thousands of families standing a little taller. Thousands of communities remembering what it meant to respect those who served. They had tried to burn a uniform. Instead, they had lit a fire that would never die. If you stood with them in spirit today, make sure to subscribe for more true stories of courage and justice. And Thomas Reed knew, with absolute certainty, that some symbols, once born of sacrifice and love, could never be destroyed. Not by fire. Not by fear. Not ever. In a world where rules and regulations sometimes overshadow basic humanity, the story of Thomas Reed reminds us of something essential. Respect cannot be legislated away. True honor, whether for service, sacrifice, or simple decency, transcends policies, fines, and fear. When Thomas's son's uniform was burned, it wasn't just cloth that was attacked, it was every principle of duty, loyalty, and pride that uniform represented. This story teaches us that standing up against injustice, no matter how powerful the opponent seems, is always worth it. When a community rallies around what is right, no force, no HOA, no rulebook, can silence that unity. It's a reminder that we, as citizens, have the power to defend what matters most, our freedoms, our dignity, and the legacy of those who gave everything for it. In our everyday lives, it's easy to stay silent, to avoid confrontation. But sometimes, the simple act of standing firm, of refusing to back down, sends ripples far beyond what we can see. Honor must be protected. Respect must be demanded. And courage, especially the quiet, everyday kind, must be lived. Because some symbols, once forged in sacrifice, are unbreakable.